All right, welcome to Geopolitics in Conflict show. Today, Ross.
Today we have a very, very special guest, and I'd like to introduce Cyrus. 很高兴认识你。
我也很高兴认识你。Wow, Ross, your Chinese is fantastic. Love it.
Well, since you learned it as an adult, you can appreciate what this challenge really is all about.
Absolutely. Oh, it's very challenging.
And so today we have Cyrus Jensen, who we've been following him on YouTube for some time and been very impressed with what he has to say. And we're delighted to have you today.
Well, David and Ross, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to come on the show. And likewise, in recent months, I've seen your channel start trending on YouTube, and I really admire the work that you're covering, and certainly about China, but all of the geopolitics, around the world, a lot of different situations. So I think, both of you bring a very established, brand, and, you really have a lot of credibility to come to the table. And I'm so glad that you guys have started this channel, and, just wish you continued success. And I'm really excited for today's episode.
Thank you.
It's great. It's great to have you, Cyrus. So what we're going to be discussing today, basically in general format, just a conversation while we have you here, is we're going to be talking about the concept or the topic of misinformation. And what I mean by this is the idea of why all of a sudden Western media, including here in the US, that all of a sudden they are targeting China with this misinformation. And we're going to delve deeper into that from different angles. We're not going to be just talking about these lies of human rights and so forth. We're going to talk about it from a geopolitical aspect. We're going to talk about it from a psychological aspect. And given your experience, given you lived in China, you will be well positioned to truly provide your assessment that Western audiences cannot get elsewhere.
That's right.
And this is what we're going to be discussing today. And I am sure our viewers will be very, very excited. They're going to be just excited to have you here with us, Cyrus. It's because we've been getting a lot of comments. Can you guys invite Cyrus Jensen? That's like, we will. It's just a matter of scheduling.
Absolutely. And it took us a while to get scheduled, but you know what? I'm excited to bring our two brands together, and, anything we can do to help the world better understand. And I think all of us are on the same page. We're wanting, partnerships, we're wanting a better world together. And I think it's like those coffee mugs say, guys, we need to stay informed. So let's start informing people.
You're absolutely correct. So
recently you did a show where you showed, here's a neutral headline about, say, maybe Germany.
Yeah.
And he said, and here's similar content, but look how it's slanted in a negative way about China.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is something that I've really been following, and I have to be honest, this was the tipping point for me actually starting a YouTube channel, because since I left China and I came to Canada, where I'm currently at in Vancouver, I'm obviously still following news in China. I still do business in China, so I'm very much connected with the country of China to this day, and will continue to be in the future. And the problem is when I came back to North America, I started, first of all, seeing a lot of stereotypes from individuals here in North America. Many people saying, wow, 10 years in China, that must have been so difficult. I mean, it must be so nice to be back in, a country with, I'm sure your house has AC now. Oh, that's a blessing. And it's like, hold on, I'm sorry. I don't think you're understanding, so much. Basically, there's a viewpoint from many Westerners about China that unfortunately is stuck in the past, and it could be 30, 40 years old. We still, amazingly, even though we know that China is this rising power, that, they have all of this infrastructure, sometimes the stereotype that exists is still, China from the 1970s. Everybody's, driving bicycles, everybody's poor. A lot of these start to exist. And, again, I just started seeing more and more negative coverage of China. And I believe it really is, because of China's rise. and what they've accomplished over the last 30 years, there's certainly, it is not a question of if China will become the #1 superpower. It is always when China will do this. It will overtake the United States. That is a fact. That is something that the world will have to deal with. And so I believe that's when you started seeing a shift and everything started to become a lot more negative on the media side.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely correct, Cyrus. I mean, I had an opportunity to write some books, and my last book about Russia, believe it or not, I addressed this particular concept you mentioned about the rise of China in the last 30 years. And this is, I believe, and this is my personal opinion, that is what is at the core argument for the West and the United States, why they couldn't accept the rise of China. Correct. And what the way to counter that is by providing this misinformation. And knowing how, we all know how Westerners' mindset is. I shall not generalize, of course, but we just consume whatever the media put out because we don't have some critical thinking to think for ourselves. It's just whatever the government says, that must be it. So
there's a thunderstorm going on here, so if you're rumbling in the background, that's thunder and lightning.
No worries. No worries.
In 2018, I took all my biases and all my fears and went to China. Went to Beijing, Xi'an, and Shanghai. Mm-hmm. To say I was stunned does not tell you the story.
Yeah.
Those cities were more beautiful, more modern, more technologically savvy than any city I've ever been in. And I've been in all the major cities in the United States, a number of Canada, and a number in Europe. Yeah. I was stunned.
Oh, absolutely. There's a really interesting phrase that I've heard, and it said there's basically two types of foreigners. There's one foreigner hates China, the other foreigner has been to China.
That's a good one, Cyrus.
and I think it's really interesting because and kind of the interesting phenomena is and I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you a quick story that was the absolute tipping point to me starting a YouTube channel. I was on LinkedIn and I had wrote an article and somebody had commented to me and he said, your views on China are so terrible. China is a horrible country. The government is doing horrible things. And I looked at his profile and he was the managing editor of this blog. That was his primary source of income. That was his job for the last 8 years. And I went to his blog and every single article was a very negative article about China.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I was like, okay, this is really interesting. So I read about 3 of the different articles, very nice writer, I said, okay, you're putting together a lot of interesting points. I don't necessarily agree with them all, but you're obviously experienced in what you do. So I messaged him. I said, I'm really interested to know your story. How long did you spend in China? What experiences did you have in China that really changed your viewpoint? And you know what he said?
I've never been there.
I've never been there and I don't need to. And I said, I'm all right, time out. Your entire job is to write about China. You have a blog that writes weekly stuff about China, and yet you've never spent a single day inside the country? And he said, well, I know exactly what my grandfathers were fighting, in Nazi Germany. I didn't need to go to Nazi Germany to realize it's bad. And I said, well, that's a very poor comparison because, the two couldn't be more different. And it's just amazing to me. And I just said, wow, this is really terrible because you have a guy that has a platform who is spreading disinformation. And, I said, look, I've been in China for 10 years. I speak the language. I do business in China today. And again, when you connect on the ground with people, we have over 825,000 foreigners on the ground in China living and working there. 25,000 of them are permanent residents inside of China. Many of them have married local Chinese, many of them who have started businesses. I mean, it is a very different thing than what most people would understand. Some people are like, how can you start a business in China? There's pathways to do that. And it's happening all over the country. But again, that's when I said, look, I gotta get out there and get my message out because, with this guy putting out this disinformation, this is just spreading hate. And then we saw COVID come and everything escalated. And so, yeah, anyways, it's just really important to stay informed and get some real insights into the ground and what's happening in China.
Before we started our show, I was following 3 very negative websites about China. Mm-hmm. And you probably know what they all are. But yeah, because I'm not going to mention them. Mm-hmm. And then when we started really digging deep into this, I realized that's worse than useless. That's adding to an unnecessary conflict. when the world needs the two major powers to come together, not continue to be in conflict.
Absolutely.
And you say it over and over again. We have more in common than separates us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ross, I mean, that's one of the things that when you spend a long time in China, and I think this is really, I mentioned this, I gave a TEDx speech earlier this year that was actually at a youth conference, and they wanted me to share my experiences in China. And I kept it very positive. I just wanted to really focus on, I spent 10 years of my life in China. These are 5 lessons that I learned that really helped transform my life.
By the way.
And thank you so much. And the interesting thing at the end, the last lesson was, we're more similar than we are different. Chinese people are no different than Americans. We all want, the best for our children. We all want to get a better job. We all want to have a better life. All of us are trying our best in this world to put one foot in front of the other, achieve some success and enjoy time with our family. I mean, that's pretty much everybody in the world's trying to do that. And so I think when you get down to the politics and stuff, I had somebody say, I heard an American say, I think we should invade China militarily just so we can liberate the people of China. And I said, and I said, you don't understand China, because I guarantee if you go to China and you talk to the majority of the people there, the vast majority would say, we're happy with our life here in China. The last thing we want is the United States to come into our country and to tell us what to do. Let's be honest, we don't really have a good track record of doing that. And I think that's and if an American says that to me, I say, what we should do? Let's focus on our problems in America. We have a lot of them. And there's a lot of things that we can improve on inside of America. Let's focus on that.
Well, look no further than what just happened in Kabul, Afghanistan. Absolutely. I mean, I spent 4 years there, Cyrus. So I was on the ground. Yeah. It became clear to me back in 2006 that this war is not going to be won, militarily speaking. And so what are we doing there for 20 years and investing over $2.3 trillion, which we could invest it right here at home? We got an old infrastructure that is crumbling before our eyes. And you're right about the politics part of it, because what most Americans do not understand, or Westerners for that matter, that the hawks in Washington will always gonna keep pushing that agenda towards you gotta focus on China negatively one way or another.
Correct.
Always bring that up to the masses for them to consume. I mean, we've seen it on our channel that you get a comment, are you guys working for China? How much does China pay you? Are you guys the mouthpiece of China? I say that's pathetic for you to even be thinking at that level. What we're trying to do is figure out a way of how to bring the two countries together to sit down and talk, because it benefits all of us.
Yeah, and that's David, that's something I say. That's my classic line I say in my YouTube videos. When the United States and China work together, the entire world is going to win. So it's not just our countries; it's the entire globe. We look at important issues like climate change, right? You're never going to solve that unless number one and number two polluters, China and the United States, are working together in this. And I think here's an interesting insight I want to share. I actually wonder a little bit to the extent, if Washington's attitude is actually affecting our free speech to a degree. Let me explain. For example, Joe Biden, when he was campaigning for president, he said that he has the most experience with Xi Jinping. Over his long political career, he was vice president for Obama for 8 years. At that time, Xi Jinping was also vice president of China for several years. And at that time, the two of them had met around 30 times. They've spent hours and hours in meetings together. What happened if Joe Biden would have came out and said, you know what, I don't necessarily agree with Donald Trump's viewpoint towards China. Why don't we learn to work together with China, and why don't we try to start a new relationship? That probably would have cost him the election. Because unfortunately, the only thing that both Republicans and Democrats can agree on, the only bipartisan thing we can agree on, is being anti-China. It's the one thing that ironically is uniting America. And I think it's really difficult because if anybody like yourselves or myself, I've been attacked on YouTube as well, when anybody says, we need a better relationship with China, we need to work this out, you must be paid by the CCP. That's the default answer. And again, it's like, well, I have freedom of speech. I want to say that. I want to say that, I don't agree with what our government, the road that we are going down. And I think that even some people have said, Cyrus, you should get involved in politics in the U.S. You should run for a political position. And I said, do you think I would do well? Unless you have that very anti-China mentality, I don't think that's going to do well in America right now. And that's unfortunate. We really need to have a big change.
What do you think about who benefits from this misinformation? We're looking at a defense budget of $730 billion, and Ted Cruz, who's a local, is he a senator?
He's a senator, yeah.
Just proposed an additional $50 billion, taking us up to almost $800 billion.
I think it's
answers we think as to who benefits.
Well, I think the answer to that is really clear. We look at, you look going back to the weapons of mass destruction, the amount of all of these, contracting. Let's be honest, war is profitable. Unfortunately, the United States is a war-based economy. We have international conflicts all over the world. We have tremendous dealings with weapon manufacturers. All of our politicians have ties to lobbyists who are campaigning for all of these things. It's a very difficult system. And it's one in which you can really ask yourself, how does an elected public official have the best interest of his people at heart, when all of these lobbyists and all of these things are happening on the background?
Yeah.
You really question, and again, it's very clear, who's benefiting from this? The weapon manufacturers, people that are, buying these stocks, people that are, these former politicians that are sitting on the boards of these very powerful companies. You don't have to go much further than Dick Cheney to look at kind of, his background and all of the things that he was involved with to just really realize, you can make a tremendous amount of money, lobbying for these things. And unfortunately, this is what's happening is, with the democracy, again, democracy, and I have to be very clear, I'm not anti-democracy. I think that America's democracy, our government is a great thing, but one of our weaknesses is that it is a popularity contest, and unfortunately, you need millions upon millions, hundreds of millions to run a political campaign. And how are you going to get that? You have to get these sponsorships.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole idea of, just to piggyback on what you just said, Cyrus, is the idea of, look, our own Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is to sit on the board of Raytheon. So even in Canada now, they came up with the report yesterday about amnesty, what Canada is doing by selling weapons to Saudi Arabia in Yemen, for what they're doing to Yemens. I've been in Yemen and I saw. It's sad to see. So the whole idea of this misinformation is not limited only to talking about human rights. That ties also to geopolitics. Right. And just to share with you, this one and our viewers as well, the report that came out from the Pentagon in 2020 regarding China's naval assets, by saying, China has now the biggest naval assets, we should be worrying. Well, it wasn't about that. They had to lie about it so they can justify the spending so Congress can allocate money. So misinformation is limited not only to this human rights and this and that or cultural aspect, but also in geopolitical, political aspects. Look just how because they know an average Joe or average Jane is not going to be understanding that kind of language. They worry about what's for dinner.
Yes.
They're not going to be worried, and the government find it convenience to them to do that kind of misinformation.
I'm afraid that I bore all my friends with what's going on with the show.
Yeah.
It sort of spills out, and I can't help but talk about China and all the rest of this.
For sure.
And my friends are relatively well educated, and bring up the China, and most recently, one of my close friends said, "We need to be afraid of them." I said, how? They said, they steal all of our jobs. And going, cut me a break.
Yeah, they don't know. They just
automation is the thing. And the way the contracts were set up we in China will manufacture, just tell us how to do it.
Yeah.
So they live up to their part of the bargain. And now the result is they steal our jobs. Yeah. When it's much more complicated than that. The automation being a major job stealer.
Well,
Yeah, and that's exactly the main point there, Ross, is that actually, when you have these factories going to China and you're producing more goods, it's actually beneficial to America in the long run. I mean, I one of my early videos, I looked at the Dow 30, these top 30 American companies. Every single one of these companies had a tremendous exposure to the country of China. It was either represented their largest markets outside of America, or it's where they manufacture the majority of their products. So this is what I always say is, you look at companies like Nike and Apple and Starbucks, and it's really funny. I was talking to a former hedge fund manager who's a big fan of the channel, has just a very experienced man and has a very good outlook on the world. And he said, look at this, people saying, don't ever invest in Chinese stocks. Well, guess what? Apple and Starbucks are Chinese stocks. At one point, Starbucks was opening a new store in China every 15 hours. Do you know why Starbucks stock has continued to appreciate? It's because China is its largest market outside the U.S. I mean, all the future growth is tremendous for it in China. And again, look at Apple. They make so many products inside of China. The profit margin is tremendous. It's all because of a relationship with China. And, obviously, if you've been a longtime shareholder of Apple or Starbucks, you've done very well. And this is all, this has been a very clear relationship, and as a result, with China.
Yeah. But it's still literally the core arguments is in the West is we are not comfortable with the speed by which China has risen. So it's just that's 30 years, 40 years, and all of a sudden you are at the top of the pack.
Correct.
And we're having a hard time accepting that reality. So the West and the US, for that matter, is going to go about any way possible to disrupt that. And I am sure I'm starting to notice it in geopolitical aspects. That's my domain. That's what I focus on. Correct. With the issue of Taiwan, with Manwan Zhou, which I'm sure you're familiar with. You did a show on it, Cyrus. I watched that one. It was very detailed. And you are there. The idea of the ASEAN countries, all of this, triggering more tensions. Why do we want to surround China with hostility? What for? What for?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to briefly touch on the Manwan Zhou, I'm here in Vancouver, as you know, and it's a story that I have been following. I've put out multiple YouTube videos, and I'll continue to do so because, one, I'm focused on U.S.-China relations. I'm here in Vancouver. You've got the two world superpowers battling it out in my backyard. It's very interesting. Very interesting to be part of that, and it's also an amazing opportunity as it's open to the public. Anybody can walk right in and sit in the media room and listen to the testimony. So it's quite fascinating to learn a lot more about Canadian law and see this entire thing unfold. This is a very big geopolitical conflict as well that involves three nations, obviously Canada included, between the U.S. and China conflict, but we're hoping to get a resolution in that as well, because that would be a game changer for all three countries moving forward. And it's something that we really need to, again, be promoting and trying to foster a better relationship. Decoupling it's not really possible. And this is the problem. Right. This is the really interesting thing. You mentioned Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz, I've made a couple videos about him. He has obviously been very much a China hawk, been very hawkish towards China. The interesting thing that many people don't know, last year in 2020, the state of Texas exported $16 billion worth of product to the country of China, which represented about a 55% increase from 2019. And this is kind of what I like to say, and I'm going to use this in a future video, is it's amazing to see what politicians say, because again, you have to go on what's popular. When you're a politician like Ted Cruz, your main focus is to get reelected. You want to stay in power. So I always say actions speak louder than words. Politicians are saying words. They're either trying to sell a book, they're either trying to get reelected, they're either trying to, have their personal interest at heart. But at the end of the day, it's the businessmen in China that businessmen in America that are saying, no, we're actually doubling down our efforts. I read a report, I think it's about, 60% of EU countries that are doing business in China are looking to expand their operations in 2021. Smart people are doing the opposite. Politicians are going to say one thing. Like I said, it's almost become that's the one thing that if you put out an anti-China article, you're going to get clicks, you're going to get good feedback, and that is what politicians are kind of riding on right now. And meanwhile, businessmen who are saying, you know what, let's make some money, let's do business together, and you know what, because that's what improves actually the quality of life for Americans and Chinese people.
Yeah.
I gotta quote Chairman Mao right now.
Okay.
Because Mao Zedong, America does not need to fear us, that we will not be cooperative. We must have American help.
Yep.
Going,
I remember
here a long time ago when Chairman Mao was not exactly a neutral player here.
Yeah.
He saw the need. And now the United States is saying, well, no, they're the enemy, and so on, going.
Yeah.
How much clearer could China be?
Yeah, and I don't know if you know the background behind that story. I shared it in one of my YouTube videos. There was a American Foreign Service diplomat by the name of John Service.
Yes.
And John Service, he was born in, I believe he was born in Sichuan. So he was born and raised in China. He was I think he was the son of two missionaries in China. So he spoke a native level Chinese. He grew up in the streets with Chinese children. And anyways, he went to work in the Foreign Service. He actually spent several days visiting with Chairman Mao, and at the time he met with Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao's wife came over, cooked him a very big dinner, and they spoke for 8 hours straight. And he talked about, these two countries, United States and China. And when John Service returned back to America to deliver that message, American government said, you're a spy. You've been, compromised. Basically they tried to put him in prison and said, we have nothing to do with this. And that message never made it back to the American government. We wouldn't even listen to the messenger. And that was a really tough thing. And this is, it's really well documented in the book, The China Mirage by James Bradley. Fantastic book detailing the historical legacy between the United States and China.
Yeah, well, there's certainly the trajectory for where things are going. It doesn't seem that the United States is willing to sit down, or the West for that matter, sit down and have direct talks with, because we come in with that attitude of we are superior, we are this, we are that. Those days are gone. Yeah. That era is gone. And we better just grip with the reality that China is rising power, whether we like it or not. And the geopolitical shift is happening, whether we like it or not. And it's going to be a new world where the United States is not the dominant power anymore, like empires before it, the Brits, the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, you name it. Yeah. That's just how things go. A change happening, and we need to change with it. So that brings me to ask you, Cyrus, since you lived there and all that, you will have a better understanding of the impact, social impact on not only the Chinese, but for you now living in Vancouver, from a Western perspective. Where do you see this is going as far as the social impact on this missing information on a daily basis about China?
Well, I think what you're going to start seeing is I feel that ultimately it's going to weaken America. And I remember reading a statistic that, for example, I think it was around 20% of new patents that were, I could be wrong on that percentage, it's somewhere between 10 to 20, if I remember. Mm-hmm. But anyways, it was a significant amount of new patents in America were issued to people with a Chinese last name. Now many of them might be, American citizens, but the reality is what my main point is that you're having a lot of Chinese over the last years. I mean, we have an amazing Chinese American community, or we have a lot of, many of our university professors, come from China. Many people are studying in the academics, because at the end of the day, America has one of the most developed, modern, and amazing university systems. We really do have an amazing university system in America. The interesting thing, though, is that America's university system is really, focusing on, and it really, the key to that success is international students, because international students pay a very high tuition, sometimes 7 to 8 times more than what a local American would pay. Typically, international students are not getting scholarships, so they are paying the full boat, either through cash or a loan. And, so this is actually very lucrative for these American universities. They depend on international students.
Say it right out loud in words. We're dependent on foreign students.
We are. We're 100% dependent. And and again, many Chinese, many foreigners from around the world come to America to study. A lot of them are Chinese. And, I think what we're going to see is you're going to see a lot of Chinese families start saying, you know what, maybe we don't want to go to America again because maybe it's not safe for my children. Maybe I'm going to go to Canada where it's a little bit safer. Maybe go to the UK, maybe Australia, maybe look at some other places. So in the long term, that is going to weaken us because we're not getting China's brightest and best minds. And that is actually, a difficult thing because we have benefited from that. And I think this is one of the other interesting things when you talk about the rise of China. I mentioned this in an earlier video. In the 1980s and 90s, if you had the opportunity to leave China, you most definitely left China and you never returned. So at that point, only the brightest minds were leaving China because only the brightest minds would qualify to get, to go to study in an American university. So all of them would eventually go to America. They would become a naturalized American citizen. They would live the rest of their life in America, marry, have children, contribute to the American economy. America benefited tremendously. But now we're seeing a shift where, people, I've had countless amount of people on my YouTube channel say, I've been living here for 20 years in America. I'm moving back to China. I'm moving back to Shanghai. I'm moving back to Beijing. I'm going back. After 20 years in America, this is now the time where, it's like, I'm going back to China. That's where I want to be. And it's a really interesting thing to see. And I think, again, you are going to look at back in Chinese history. The time that China was the most weak was when it shut its borders and basically lost contact with the outside world. China had the idea, we don't need anybody from the outside. Everything is going to come domestically. We're going to shut down our border. And that is when China did not develop for many years, and foreign influences came in and easily attacked and defeated and just manipulated China. So it's not about, focusing inwardly. Yes, it's great. I love buy local, right? Go to your local coffee shop. If I see a Canadian business, great. And here in Vancouver, we have so many businesses, proudly Vancouver-based. Fantastic, support them. But it's also unrealistic to think, Canada, we should make everything within our borders. Everything should be Canadian made. That's a very inefficient way of thinking. And the same thing, Canada is a country that embraces diversity. It very much is a immigration or a migrant country. And I think that is the strength of Canada, is that they embrace people from many different cultures. And here in Vancouver, we have probably the largest Chinese community outside of China, in a city. We have an amazing Chinese community here in Vancouver that has been so beneficial to the economy and to life here in Vancouver.
Here in Dallas, we have more than 30,000 Chinese or Chinese Americans.
Yeah.
Huge communities.
Fantastic. Absolutely. It's great. And that's
and
what
the school systems have the reputation of being the best students are fill in the blank.
Yeah, China.
Absolutely.
The education system, for Chinese, how do you think about the education aspects of it?
Oh, yeah. The pressure on the kids to do well.
Yeah.
I understand the pressure in China for the young people to do well is horrendous.
It is. It's very competitive. It's a very, very difficult system. In China, the people study for the Gaokao. The Gaokao is the college entrance examination. That's a 3-day test, very different than our SATs in America, where I know when I took them, it was maybe a couple hours, and you didn't do well, no problem, just take it again. A very different setup in China. And so, students, study their whole life, really to get that one test, and that really determines a lot of fate. That's something that China can really improve on. I never like to paint China as this utopia. China has, as every country in the world, China has and as you can imagine, it has 1.4 billion people. That is a lot of people to manage. There's not enough schools in China. There needs to be more priority on education. But I think you're going to see, the government is going to prioritize that. And they're trying to, again, eliminating poverty has been a very big mission of China's government. They need to improve their healthcare. They need to improve their education. They need to continue to get better and evolve. And I think, you're going to see China continue to move towards that.
Well, they are indeed for the. I read some reports, Cyrus, about the poverty aspects in China. I mean, they are making some strides in elevating the masses from the poverty to at least to that middle class, shall we say? There are those who ask the question, sociologists mainly, that could this become a problem for China? In the sense that you're talking about the masses are all well educated, and that could trigger some issues to China. I don't see that happening personally. It's because the system will always be there to make sure that the economy per se is serving the people, not the other way around. So something we don't see here in the U.S. because who controls the
No, that's a really good point, David. And this is really big because, for example, when Ant Financial, was ready to go IPO, China came in at the very last second. I mean, just hours before it went IPO and immediately halted everything. And if you really analyze the background on what was happening, if you just look at, and this is the problem, in today's news, we live in a society, we live in a world that is just too much information out there. I mean, it is information overload. And this is what these newspapers realize. We know that most people are going to read the title. They're going to maybe read the first, second line. They're basically, who reads an article from every word, from the top all the way to the very last one? Not many people. Most people are glancing. Most people look at headlines. So this is editors know that. They can publish things that can change public opinion very quickly, knowing that we're all have this information overload and we're only going to read titles. But this is something that if so on the surface, Western media would say, this is China killing an entrepreneur's dream. This is China being anti-capitalistic. But no, if you actually do the background information and realize that it was potentially exposing China to a tremendous amount of unhealthy loans, a tremendous amount of debt, a very dangerous situation. And this is something that China said, look, we don't want that kind of stress on the society. Let's take a moment. Let's take back. And what we need to do, we need to change the regulation. You need to actually be regulated as a bank now, because you are not just a finance company. You are more operating like a bank. Therefore, you need to follow under these regulations because that's going to provide more stability and it's going to be less risk. And that is going to ultimately, be better for the society. And again, on the surface, it's like Jack Ma, he's probably in prison or being tortured. No, it's not going to take down its top entrepreneur, one of its top entrepreneurs. Jack Ma has done an amazing thing, many amazing things in China. And again, you look at Alibaba, Alipay, which is one of the top mobile payment solutions. These are all parts of China's poverty alleviation plan. They played very significant roles in that. So again, you just really have to understand a little bit more what's going on behind the scenes to really understand what's happening in China.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Raj.
One of the things we hear here in the United States is the Chinese people are so repressed. They can't voice their opinion.
Yeah.
And by the way, if they open their mouths, their organs are going to be harvested. I mean, absolute nonsense. When we were there, it wasn't like that at all. And I know you've got some very interesting things to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it really is just a lot of it again is just this perception. It's a perception in America that this was funny when I met a man here in Canada and I told him that I had lived in China, and he said, "Man, it must have been so scary living in a communist country." I can imagine. There must be police everywhere on the street. You have to probably give up your passport. You have people following you all around. I said, no, I think what you're thinking of is probably a little bit more similar to North Korea. North Korea, you have to go on a guided tour. You have to be with a North Korean tour guide 24/7. You give up your passport. You get to see what they want you to see. You go in, you get out. That's your experience in North Korea. Meanwhile, again, like I said earlier, in China, you can start a business, you can work as a foreigner. I mean, this is, there's a tremendous amount of freedoms, for all people inside of China. It is just very different. And I think, I think it was really interesting. I remember seeing a tweet, and somebody had said, on the back of his SUV, he had written, "Donald Trump is a blankety blank blank blank," in very big profanity.
Yeah.
He had plastered it over, and he said, "This is why America is the best country in the world, because I can say whatever I want to say, and try that in China. Try that in China, you would be arrested." And the thing is, yeah, it's true. If you had a massive sign like that on your car, you probably would get arrested in China. But you have to look at it from a cultural perspective. Chinese people would never insult somebody like that of a senior position. You are giving respect to that person. You don't necessarily have to agree with them. But again, this issue of giving and receiving face is really important. Chinese people, their answer to that, well, isn't it better that we don't have a leader that we have to, talk about it like that? Like, we don't need to say that about that. And I think it's just really interesting because I had shared this in an earlier video. The top social media content creator in all of China in 2020. He was a professor from a university. He has tens of millions of followers in China. And what he does is he looks at different law cases inside of China. And he basically talks about them on his channel. And as a result of this, he calls for public outcry to change this specific law. And this was something that we saw earlier in China this year. In March 1st, 2021, there was 13 new laws that were passed in China. And every single one of them came as a result of public outcry, people saying, "I do not like this law. It is not fair. We need to change it." One of them, for example, was students that were caught cheating on this college entrance examination. Sometimes students would be using the ID of another person, and then taking that test. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, this is a very big deal in China. People are spending their whole life doing this. So they said, this guy got caught doing that. He didn't get any penalty. Basically, like, a slap on the wrist. He should be in jail. This should be a very strict penalty because it's not fair to us. We're studying our whole lives for this. Why does this guy get a cheat? And China's government said, fair enough. We're going to put a much harsher penalty in there. And there's different, all of these different laws, 13 new laws that came into effect. All of them were a result of public outcry, from Chinese people that are speaking out. And again, there's protests that happen in China. Again, it was very interesting to hear. I highlighted this in a video where, thousands of students were protesting at a university because a university had announced it was going to merge with a vocational school. Now, if you're at the vocational school,
the story, and with a lot of negative press around it.
Oh, a lot of negative press, right? And I mean, the interesting thing, Ross, is, the vocational school, obviously not as high as a university. So if you're at a vocational school, you're thinking, great, I'm now affiliated with the university. But if you're at the university, you're thinking, well, I'm paying a lot of money. Why am I going down to their level? So you can imagine, I mean, we always forget this. Chinese are humans. If they're angry, of course they're going to speak out. Of course they're going to get angry. There's people that fight in China. There's people that get angry. There's people that protest. But the thing is that, what happened? Well, the university thought about it, and then they said, you know what? We're going to retract that. We're not going to do that because it doesn't make much sense. And so, this was a you can actually argument. Well, the protest was a success. Obviously, if nobody protested, they wouldn't have made the change. That they wanted to do that. But again, we have an idea that, okay, as soon as you protest, China's sending in the tanks and they're going to gun everybody down because that's what it does. No, that's not what happens. If anything, police were sent in just to make sure that, you have all these protesters, people were fighting. Yeah, okay. If you have a fight on a university, I'm pretty sure they're going to call the police in as well in America, if there's an altercation. And they do. So again, it goes back to, we're more similar than we are different. And the same thing, people say, well, what about social media? It's censored in China. It is censored in China. But guess what? There's a lot of censorship that goes on.
Oh, it's here.
in America as well. Anything about that here. Yeah. I mean, we would have to watch what we say on this channel.
Yeah. Hey, Cyrus, they restricted my LinkedIn account.
Yeah.
Because I posted an article about China's manufacturing, okay, and shared it with the group.
Yeah.
And somebody went ahead and sent whatever report, and they restricted it. When I digged enough to find out who that person was, and I did. It was a project manager for manufacturing. He didn't like the fact that I mentioned It was our decision to move all the manufacturing to China.
Exactly.
I mean, so why are you? Yeah, I see your point. So we have it right here.
No, and that's one thing I often say too, gentlemen, is it's really interesting when people say, China's stealing our jobs. Just remind me one more time, was it China that begged the U.S. companies to come over and, is China forcing Apple to come over and like, you must manufacture your iPhones here? No, it's Apple going over and saying, I want to manufacture there. I'll tell you an interesting story. I mean, at my first job in China, I was working in the golf industry. And every year we have the largest golf trading show in the world every year in Orlando, Florida. It's every January, and Orlando is my hometown. So every year I'd fly from China. I'd go to attend the trade show because I'm in the golf industry. And my name tag, it says Cyrus Jensen, Shanghai, China. And, that's where I was based at the golf club that I was affiliated. And I cannot tell you how many companies, and as soon as they saw that Shanghai, China, their eyes just lit up. You're in China? Yeah. Can you help us manufacture? We do everything here in America, but it's so expensive. Can you help us? Do you have connections to factories? Help us. We'll cut you in on a deal. We'll make it. You want to be a partner in my company? I mean, there was dozens of companies every year would look at me and say, be our bridge into China. Be our bridge into China. Let us get into China because we need to manufacture in China because they do great quality. It's a better cost price, and we can be more profitable. So
that does not sound like China came and stole American jobs.
Exactly. And that's something I want people to realize is that, again, this is, when you have, so again, if you are, let's say you're going to make golf bags and you're going to manufacture them in China and your company's doing well, you're employing more, American people, you're selling to more, you're becoming more profitable, you can employ more people. And again, I'm not I don't want to be anti-American manufacturing. If there's a way to manufacture in America and it works out for your company, fantastic, great, let's do it. But you know what, it is also just really interesting to see, again, we live in a global economy. And again, like I said earlier, it really is about connecting all of our economies and doing business and trade because, I want to have a good relationship with Germany. There's great manufacturing and products coming from Germany. We need to be doing trade with Germany just as much as we need to do with Australia, China, everywhere. That's how you have a truly global economy.
Well, certainly, just to piggyback on what you just said, Cyrus, Apple won't want to produce the phone over here. It's because when Huawei introduced the phone that was supposed to be sold in the U.S. for $129, the U.S. government shut it down so they can sell it for $1,000. The Apple, and yet they manufacture everything back in China. So
absolutely,
I got one more not question, but just one more point. I'd like to have your insights on it, Cyrus, since you live there. Sure. It's the Belt and Road Initiative.
Oh, good one.
So the BRI, because I've been following this for years as part of my academic background and so forth.
Fantastic.
And there's always this notion of, especially in the Western world, when you read the summary about anything pertaining to BRI, one thing that comes out always, it says, that trap.
Correct.
I've always noticed this one is always associated with the BRI. Now, we're seeing how big BRI became. 68 countries involved, and over $8 trillion project. Yeah. Where do you see that going?
Well, I think what you see with China, it's very interesting because, for example, one of the things with China that people need to know, there's not enough arable land in China for China to produce enough food for its country. So this is one of the things that's important. So China, very much, China is not going to shut down its borders and only produce domestically. They need relationships with other countries, just from a food perspective. We need to have, they need to have more rice and chicken and all of these things, for their country. They're going to produce as much as they can domestically, but they're also going to import. Now, when you look at other products and other services and, other countries around the world, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is really fascinating because in, the first 7-8 years that we've seen Belt and Road, one of the stats that, like you said, we always hear debt trap economy. It's just everywhere, but no one talks about that there's already been $8 trillion worth of trade done in BRI. So that means that's real tangible results that are affecting the lives of people around the globe. And I think that's really important to highlight. I like to give one example. I'm going to talk one of the main, let me give you an example of what Western media uses. actually, they always talk about this port that was built in Sri Lanka. And, right. And that is kind of the classic example that people use about, look at debt trap economy. Sri Lanka built a port. Within 18 months, they defaulted on the loans. China now owns the whole thing. That was their whole intention along, evil China. Here's the interesting thing about it. Do you want to know what the first country that actually researched and wanted to do that project? It was actually Canada. Canada researched that project way before China even got involved. Canada had actually basically laid the blueprint out. It was Canada that said, we want to build this port, for you, do this relationship with you. But ultimately, Canada didn't have enough funds. And so they never even got started on it. China said, okay, no problem. We're going to come in. We're going to do the same deal. Now, let's just use our brain here. Somebody defaulted on a loan within 18 months. How do you default on a loan within 18 months? Well, what people don't like to tell you is that Sri Lanka's government took all of the funds and basically, wasted it all. They basically had so much corruption within the government that within 18 months, they had no more money left.
Just shocking.
Yeah, right. And so, it's like, okay, now let's just put yourselves in China's shoes. Are they trying to, do they want to return on their investment? Of course they do. Of course. If I'm a bank and I'm going to give you a mortgage, of course I want a return on that. I'm not going to give you an interest-free loan forever. There's no point, right? So why am I going to invest in Sri Lanka and build you a port if there's nothing in it for me? There's nothing wrong with that. It's called doing business. Now, if you look at the terms of these loans, many of them are for very favorable rates over very long times. It's not like, okay, we're going to give you a 15% loan over 3 years. No, it's usually, a very reasonable percentage over 30, 40 years. It's a very long amortized loan. And the thing is that when you look at, I like to use this example, the United States, we have provided a tremendous amount of humanitarian aid around the world. And I think that's a fantastic thing. You look at, for example, the continent of Africa. We send American doctors to do the Operation Smile surgery, right? Which is beautiful. These poor children, they're born with a cleft lip, for a couple $100, you're going to fix them. They're going to live a better life. We're providing, for polio and AIDS and, malaria, all of these outreach and stuff. So, America has done a great job providing financial aid and support around the globe. So definitely want to give a shout out to America for that. However, I think the interesting thing is that it's the analogy of giving a man a fish or teaching him how to fish. Because you come into Africa and I'm going to fix your lip. Okay, great. But at the end of the day, you're living in a poor village. You have no roads. You have no education. How are you going to get out of that? And this is what we're seeing in China. How do you eliminate poverty? Well, you do it through education. We have to get these people from the poorest provinces and get them into a better housing. We need to provide their children with better schooling, because if you can get educated, you're going to get a better job. If you have a better job, you make more money, and you're going to have longer term success. So now we bring it back to Africa, and you're looking at a country that has very much lacking the infrastructure. And we're saying, okay, we're going to build you a road. We're going to build you a port. And we're going to start building infrastructure there. And now all of a sudden, you guys can start manufacturing. Now all of a sudden, you can start exporting things. Now all of a sudden, you have a pathway to become an entrepreneur, or at least probably double your salary. So maybe you're making $10 a month. Well, guess what? Now you're making $20. Is $20 a month not a lot of money? No, but you just doubled though. It is a significant improvement. So I think that's where you're really looking at. And another example that I like to give is the island country of the Maldives. This is a fascinating case study. China, the Maldives before, obviously a beautiful country. Many islands and beautiful 5-star resorts. Their entire economy is based on tourism. Now, 95% based on tourism, right? Everybody's coming in and staying at these nice hotels. Now, up until a few years ago, their airport was abysmal. They had a terrible airport, terrible infrastructure. And China said, what we're going to do? We're going to come in, we're going to build you a brand new state-of-the-art airport. But we want to own it. We want to own the airport. And so, great. So let's make a deal with China. Sure, build us this fantastic airport. You can, we'll lease it to you. We'll charge you a monthly rent. We'll figure out how we want to do it. You can generate most of the, obviously the airport is generating revenue from all these airlines that are flying in. You can make the majority of the money. But how are the Maldives people going to benefit from this? Well, all of a sudden, guess who's sending a bunch of flights to Maldives now? China. As soon as COVID-19 started to ease up in China and people were starting to fly again, there was 100 million renminbi worth of travel booked to the country of the Maldives from China.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So you're talking. So I mean, if I'm the Maldives president, I'm looking at it from an economic standpoint. I have no problem with China coming in and building an airport and even owning that airport or generating the majority of the revenue. Because at the end of the day, you're sending your tourists, and not just from China, but now everybody in the world can start coming in because we've got a bigger, expanded airport. We have better infrastructure. Now, all of a sudden, who's going to benefit? Well, all the people in my country, because now all our 5-star resorts could probably accommodate double the amount of people, and we're going to have more infrastructure and better. Now, is China going in and saying, you know what we need to do? We need to colonize them. We need to show them that communism is the best way forward. Now, the Maldives, in order for us to build this airport, you must convert from your government to China's government. Not a chance. China could care less about that. And that's something that I just do not see. I don't see China going around the world spreading their way of life. At the end of the day, Chinese people and the government is interested in relationships and interested in doing business. And I think if that's what we can really focus on, there's no problem. So the Maldives has benefited tremendously from that relationship. And if I was the president, I would have no problem with that. Now, if China comes in and start changing to communism, then you could have an issue. But again, China's not going to do that.
Evidence of that.
They're never going to. And I guess, and gentlemen, that's really where I see. I always say the biggest problems between our two countries, America and China, comes down to a cultural differences. You look back at that Alaska meeting that took place at the beginning of this year.
What a fiasco.
Right? I mean, at the end of the day, it is just, it goes back to that thing. Well, we are America. You need to do it our way. And China just says, look, at the end of the day, you know who should be included in that G7 meeting? China, because we are one of the top countries in the world. We should be meeting with you guys. We should be, we need to be in the conversation now. And it can't just be America and its Five Eyes Alliance versus, that control the world. China deserves a seat at the table. They are a global, economy. I mean, they are a very big part of this global economy, I should say.
And Cyrus, what was the key topic in the G7? It was China. That's what they talked about.
Absolutely.
So.
And I think that China and India both deserve a seat at that table. And, you're looking at, and the interesting thing, when you're looking at the world, the demographics, some experts had said, by the year 2100, 80 years from now, China's population is actually going to be much smaller because they have a very large, aging population. But India will overtake China, and India, is going to be the next, big economy. So, economists are predicting that at some point in the future, India is going to take over China. So even China's reign potentially might not be that long as number one. And you know what? Like you said, over the year, if you study history, empires come and they go. This is how the world happens. But maybe 30 years from now, India is number one in the world. It'll be interesting to see.
It's interesting to see every place that China goes that they're loaning, making loans, and doing the Belt and Road Initiative. They're saying we want a win-win scenario here,
right?
And then it raises there's a big question about the Chinese military.
Yeah,
and we see the United States budget as almost $800 billion. We see the Chinese economy, which is focusing a whole lot more on education,
correct,
and on the military. And what's the comparison here? I mean, what do you think of this?
Well, I think with military, one of the things that I think we got to be very honest. The United States has the biggest military in the world. There really isn't a country that could compete with us. I mean, if we're talking with a battle to battle, if we're gonna number 2 military in the world is China. If China and the United States went to a conflict, the United States would easily win that. I mean, we have the technology, the infrastructure to, really dominate militarily. However, I think that China, if you are in China's position, you are going to be building up a military. I mean, you have a country of 1.4 billion people. It's the same reason. Why does America, with 330 million people, why do we have so much money invested in the military? Why do we have 800 military bases around the world that we are maintaining? Are we really worried about national security? Are we worried about, who's going to attack us? I mean, at the end of the day, we spend more on military than the next 9 countries combined.
Yeah.
Most of whom are our closest allies. So it's just an interesting thing. I mean, we know that the United States will always have a very big military. I mean, as an American, I don't fear a growing Chinese military because I know that China's not going to attack America. They just have no interest in doing that. But I do believe that they are growing a military presence, because if I was in China's position, I would be doing that as well. You're a growing nation. You have a very large country. You have a very large, obviously eastern border that, on the Pacific Ocean. I mean, you're going to need to have a Coast Guard. You're going to need to have an army, an Air Force. You're going to invest in these things as any major country would be. It'd be the same thing if you reverse the roles. If China was number one and America was catching up to China, I'm pretty sure, America would be investing in military. Well, we should. We're a rising power. That's just what you need to do. You need to have a strong military presence. But I don't see, like you said there, you hit the nail on the head. China goes into situations looking for a win-win. But again, you have to understand the cultural significance about this. And this is a really interesting thing that when you talk about Taiwan, for example, when the United States and China started to open up, they started establishing diplomatic relations. There was one key thing that China said. There's one thing that you have to absolutely respect, and that is the one China principle. Yeah. And that is to this day why America does not recognize Taiwan as an independent country. It still does not recognize Taiwan as an independent country. It does recognize it as a part of China. And I know that is very, very political, that entire issue. But again, that was really the cornerstone of that relationship, saying, look, you have to respect this from our perspective. And I think that is where with China, will China have a democracy one day? I don't know, maybe. But we're talking, we're talking, 100 years, what's the Communist Party in China going to look like 50 years from now, 100 years from now?
Even
I don't
10
know.
years from now, there's a real question about it. When you look at how they've changed and evolved just in the last 20 years, it's really impressive.
It's incredible. I mean, when you look at China's, just 30 years ago, and if you would have told Chinese citizens, you're going to be able to get a 10-year multiple entry visa to the United States of America. You can send your kids abroad. You can immigrate. You can work as an expat. You can buy houses. You can invest in the stock market in China. If you would have said that 30 years ago, people would have been, what? Like, no way. I don't think China's ever going to do that. But again, we see things where they're opening up, and it's really interesting to see from an expat perspective, because when I went to China in 2007, it was a very different China back then. It was a little bit more like the wild, wild west, for lack of a better analogy. I mean, things were not as structured and disciplined. And I like to tell the story of when I got my driver's license for the first time in China. In 2007, you could walk into the driver's license bureau in Shanghai, and you could literally pay somebody 100 renminbi on the spot to sit down and take the test for you. It was blatant corruption. And I went with my translator because I didn't speak Chinese at that time. And she said, do you want to try to take the test? It's in English, or do you want to just pay this guy to take it for you? I'm like, I'm sorry. She's like, did I not translate that right? I'm like, no, I understood what you said. I just don't how is that possible? How can this guy take the test for me? And she said, well, it just, he knows the answer, so he can take it for you. I'm like, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure he does know the answers. He works here. But isn't there hilarious? And that's literally what happened. And so the interesting thing is that, when you saw China evolve in 2012, 2013, everything changed. And now it's, in order to get your test as a foreigner or a Chinese, you have to take a 100-question test. You need 90% or better to pass. So very, very high score. And you have a word bank. You have a question bank of around 1,500 questions. So you can get a book with 1,500 questions. You got to study hard. It's a very difficult test. I studied for weeks leading up to that. Wow. I got a 92% to pass, and that's how I was able to get my second driver's license in China. And again, you just saw everything changed because it's like, well, that was the old China, and again, similar thing. I mean, I remember when I came to Vancouver, I had to basically get a police report from China stating, that I lived in China for 7 years and that I, didn't commit a crime in China. I needed that for my immigration here in Canada. And I remember contacting the police. I had a contact back in Shanghai, and I said, is there any way, like, do you have any connection with the police? Like, could you help me? Essentially, like, can you, like, I'm kind of in a rush. Can you kind of get my application to the top of the queue? Can you bring it to the top? Can you prioritize that? This was a very established businessman in Shanghai, and he said, "Oh, Cyrus, everything's very strict now in China. Like, you can't, if this was before, I could have just said, hey, I know somebody in the police office. I'll give him a couple hundred renminbi, and he'll just move your application to the top. And maybe even as a favor, he'll just pass you because, and maybe I need to buy him a nice bottle of whiskey. I can get it done today. Just, what I'll do? I'll buy him a bottle of whiskey. He'll pass it today. What do you want it to say? You want it to say 7 years? You want it to say 10 years? You want to say, basically, I can manipulate that. Just need to buy the guy a bottle of whiskey. Now he's like, no. Everything's structured. Everything's, the anti-corruption campaign has come in. And what I can do is I'm gonna get my assistant. She'll help you with the application, and we'll go drop it off for you at the police station in Shanghai. That's but you're gonna have to go through the queue. There's nothing I can do to help you. And I said, good. Like that's China becoming on an international standard, and that's improving.
When we're in China, that was very much the conversation with the Chinese people. They're very proud of that.
Yeah,
that was going on.
Yeah, and I think that's where you've seen. I'm in 07, 08, there was blatant political corruption, everywhere. And, I remember I had a student who said, yeah, I built this new restaurant. Here's a patio. We were supposed to have a handicap ramp, but I was like, well, if I put a handicap ramp in, I lose 5 tables. So I paid off the guy and, he just said, forget it. You don't need it. And now I added an extra 5 tables in. Well, now everything's by the book, right? You have these certain policies and standards. And I think this is what you've seen in China is there's a progression. There is a progression. It's becoming more and more westernized. It's becoming more and more structured. Last time I was in China, you're in a restaurant and everything's no smoking. And you have people going outside to smoke. And that is such a foreign concept because when I first went, everybody's smoking inside a restaurant. And I even thought to myself, I'm like, wow, this is unusual because, in America, we've banned smoking for a long time. I said, and I remember thinking to myself, this is something that probably will never change because smoking is very big in Chinese society. And can you imagine Beijing trying to pass a law to ban smoking? That'll never happen. And here you go. Now it's banned everywhere. You can't smoke inside these restaurants. People observe the rules. It's changing, and getting more and more better. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand.
Maybe one last topic.
That's actually, what is it?
I've been following what's going on with Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And the former president of Taiwan, he said, let's just get along with the mainland.
Yeah.
Okay. And the mainland just pretty much let them alone from what I could tell.
Right.
And then a new president came on and she said, we want our independence. And it just threw gasoline on a small flame and made it a big flame.
Correct.
And so my observation is, if you just let it alone, the central government's not going to mess with you. Is that a good observation?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point. And this is something I'm going to probably do a deep dive on a YouTube video. To kind of touch on this subject. But I think what you see is, one of the things that I really noticed interesting, gentlemen, is when I was in Shanghai, I noticed there was a tremendous amount of Taiwanese expats that were living in China. And many Taiwanese. So out of that 825,000 foreigners that live in China, that does not include people from Macau, Hong Kong, or Taiwan. So when you add in these 3 places, they kind of have a special status. Obviously they're all part of China, but I think it goes up. I think that's an extra 600,000 people between these 3 places as well. So it's probably, if you count them as foreigners, or special status, if you will, that would be 1.3, 1.4 foreigners in China. But anyways, there was very vibrant Taiwanese expat community in Shanghai, and many of the Taiwanese loved living in Shanghai. And if you travel to Taiwan, and I've been there many times, it is a beautiful place. It is Taipei is a fantastic city. But what you notice is it's kind of like going back in time. It's very slow paced. The infrastructure is not as built that well. Yeah, you have the Taipei 101 and kind of some nice shopping malls around that area, but it's very much a rural feeling. And you go to Taiwan, there's, the best thing to do to Taiwan, you go there, you eat great food, they have fantastic night markets, they have amazing restaurants, and it's a very slow paced, very slow. Everything is slow paced. I loved it because when I was living in Shanghai and Hong Kong, I'd go to holiday for Taiwan, and it was just like, wow, it's a great place to relax. And when I was chatting with people, and I love going to Taiwan because you're going to a new place and everybody speaks Mandarin, and so everyone loves speaking Mandarin with me. And I jump in a taxi, and they're like, "Oh, you're from Shanghai? Man, I went there. What a great city! Just look at the hustle, the bustle. It's like, look at Taiwan, look at Taipei. If you came here 20 years ago, it looked the exact same thing, not except that big building we built. But besides that, everything's pretty much the same. So you have kind of the older generation that recognize the importance of a relationship with mainland China. And, you have a lot of these older generation. Again, I know a lot of Taiwanese expats that just love being in mainland China. And what's happening is you have a youth that is consuming social media, that is really influenced very heavily from America. And you have a new president, a new female president there in Taiwan. She has really ridden on the coattails of this social media influence and really, saying the things that the youth want to hear and garnering a tremendous amount of support from the youth in Taiwan. But older Taiwanese, they don't like her. They don't like her, and they don't like her radical way of thinking because they're on the standpoint of, we need to have a relationship with, mainland China. And this is something that, again, when you go to, I know I have a lot more experience in Hong Kong as I lived there for 3 years. And it was amazing. The same thing you saw, that the most vocal and radical people in Hong Kong are people under the age of 21 who have never worked a day in their life, are still students, have very little idea of how this world works. And, I would talk with, I spent a lot of time in 2014 at the political protest, the umbrella movement that was right down in Central. And I spoke with these protesters because I said, I really want to know your standpoint. Like, why are you so anti-China? And they just said, we want to be an independent country. We don't want anything to do with mainland China. And I said, well, it's interesting because, 80% of your flights are coming in from China. 80% of your hotel rooms are booked because of, mainland Chinese who come to Hong Kong for holiday. So much of your economy is dependent on mainland China. You would die if you were separate, if you were cut off. If mainland China cut you off, you would absolutely suffer. But on the flip side, every single businessman, every single person that was above the age of, not every single, but the majority of businessmen, just realize it's like, look, we are Chinese. There's no doubt about it. You are Chinese. You are from Hong Kong. Hong Kong is part of China. We are Chinese. We have an interesting history with the British. We have different, certainly you take somebody from Beijing, it's going to be very different from somebody from Hong Kong. That's the beauty of China. That's actually why I'm really glad that I lived in both mainland and Hong Kong, because I have a very good understanding. And I think, Hong Kong is a beautiful part of China. And I loved living there. But I think when you talk to businessmen, all of them are investing in China. They're doing business in China. They realize the importance of that relationship. I think it's the same thing in Taiwan. The older generation, they realize that importance. And again, I don't see a situation where China is going to militarily invade Taiwan. All of a sudden we're sending in tanks and fighter pilots and, we're going to start bombing people. Like, at the end of the day, mainland China wants, improved relations and more economic cooperation with Taiwan as well. And this is actually what Xi Jinping, he was in the Fujian province. Fujian is the province that borders, not borders, but is directly across the bay from Taiwan.
Yeah.
He was very heavily involved for, I believe he was in that position for around 12 to 15 years, somewhere around there. But one of his main things that he did was fostering relationship between Fujian province and Taiwan and building trade for over well over a decade between Taiwan and mainland China, and building that trade up between many Taiwanese and many Chinese companies. And so I see, again, China focuses on, the economics. And maybe this is something I can end on. And I appreciate you. I know I've spoken a lot. I really appreciate coming on your guys' show. But there's one thing I want to end, and this is something that I learned here in Canada. Pierre Trudeau, the former prime minister from Canada, he is the father of the current prime minister, Justin Trudeau. He first went to China many times. I think in the 50s he went to China for the first time. But again, he actually established diplomatic relations with Canada and China 1 year before Richard Nixon did with America. And Pierre Trudeau went over to China in the early 1970s, and he said, I'm noticing that you are setting yourselves up for economic growth. You have a very unique system. Let's be honest. It's not going to be good for Canada. Like, it's not going to match with our Canadian values. So why don't we just do this? Let's not talk about politics. Let's not let politics come in between a successful relationship between Canada and China. Instead, let's focus on business. Let's focus on working together. That way we can help Canadians, and Chinese are going to benefit from that. Because at that point, like you said, China knew that they needed foreign investment. They very much needed people from around the world to come in and invest in China, to help that economy grow. And I think that's where we really need to get back to is, at the end of the day, China can figure out what is the best system for them to govern. And again, look at their track record the last 30 years. They've achieved a tremendous amount of success. The moment China starts trying to export that around the world, most specifically in my country, America, if they come and try to say, America, you should be communist, I'll be the first one to say, no, China, you're wrong. Please retreat. Do not try to come in. But I think we should offer the same respect back. Why should we go into China and say, you need to do it our way? That is not showing the respect. And again, this is how I conclude everything. This is why issues go back to a cultural difference between our countries. Understanding that culture is how you're going to understand the geopolitical conflict.
Talking with you has been just absolutely wonderful and fascinating. 谢谢.
Thank you. 哎呦，不客气，不客气. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, David. I appreciate, gentlemen, your time, and I really appreciate the effort you're doing. It's been an honor for me to be on your show.
Thank you so much. Well, we're so glad to have you, Cyrus, and we thank you for carving out time for us. I'm sure we're going to do this again. And for our viewers, here is their wish came through. It came true. You are the Cyrus, man. Here is Cyrus. So I'm sure they're gonna truly enjoy your insights, and we can't thank you enough, Cyrus. So we appreciate you. So just for our viewers, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.